Who here has ever voted in an election? Show of hands. Oh, most of you, great. Um, who here has ever wondered how accurate the election results were after they voted? A couple people. Yeah, it's a big topic nowadays. You see it in the media. It's a fair question, probably to wonder about. After this presentation, you'll have an answer. Yeah, if you've never voted, if you're not registered to vote, it's real easy to do. You can do it online. You can do it on your phone. I'll have a link up later for anybody who didn't raise their hand earlier. My name is Jeremy Azevedo. I serve as Chief Development Officer for the West Virginia Secretary of State's office. I've been there for 11 years. I've been there for 6 federal elections, including the 2016 federal election, where some of my software that I wrote was targeted by Russian nation-state hackers. So we'll be talking about that in just a little bit. We'll also be talking about the history of election interference. We'll be talking about nation-state hacking today. We'll be talking briefly about SQL injection, the role of online systems in our elections, and hopefully we've got time for questions. All right. Yeah, election interference isn't new. For as long as we've had elections, there's been election interference. I'm sure the very first election we had in Athens, Greece, they used rocks to determine the winner of that election. Somebody probably tried to grab 2 rocks instead of 1 and put it in the POW. It's yeah, and that's a type of double voting. Double voting used to be actually kind of common. It's relatively easy. It used to be relatively easy to do. You basically, after you voted, you would get back in line and hopefully nobody notices. Poll workers were trained to try to remember who came through the line, but we're all human, right? You know, people would put on disguises. You could also go to a different polling location. You vote in one location, you go to another. Again, it was up to the polling workers to know that, you know, you're probably not supposed to be voting here. You're probably, you know, a town over or something like that. Cooping is another form of election interference. It used to be very common. The way cooping works, people usually, I mean, from both sides, you know, politicians, they would actually hire thugs. And not just to intimidate voters, they would actually go and kidnap people and force them to go through election lines. And they would force them to go through over and over and over again. There's actually a popular theory about Edgar Allan Poe's death. He was a poet, you know, from the early 1800s. There's a common theory. Nobody actually knows how he died, but he appears to, it might have been like alcohol related, which, you know, you might be wondering how would an alcohol related death be related to voting or cooping. But back in the 1800s, they would, after you voted, they would give you a shot of whiskey, actually, when you were done. Need a pointer or something, or okay. So yeah, I mentioned double voting used to be very common, used to be a lot easier than it is today. Today, it's very rare. We use computers, we use the internet actually to basically before the election, we print poll books, right? Because we have a list of everyone who's registered to vote. We know what polling location you ought to vote at. And so we print a polling book so that when you come through, they basically just check you off so you can't come through again. There are people who have tried to register in more than one state. If you live on the border of, say, West Virginia and Ohio. There are people who will try to register to vote in West Virginia and also in Ohio and go between both states on election day. Well, we talk to all the other states. So if you try to vote in more than one state after the fact, we'll find you. It's like I said, it's actually very rare. We do look for people. We do occasionally find people. It's a felony if you try it, so don't try it. Yeah, so I mentioned in 2016, I was working for the Secretary of State's office. Before that election, we obviously in 2016, we cared about cybersecurity. We tried to secure our systems as best as we could. At the time, the big topic was identity theft. Nobody had any clue or any idea that nation states like Russia were going to try to interfere in the election. So what Russia did, actually, they managed to hack the voter registration databases of both Arizona and Illinois. They were able to leak information about that, and obviously, I'm sure most of you know, they were spreading misinformation about the elections and using the clout from those hacks to cause people to doubt the validity of the election. Russia, they used SQL injection, actually, in the state of Illinois. It's a very common exploit. It's, I don't want to say, it's almost a little kind of embarrassing for it was the state of Illinois they used SQL injection in. You hear that Russia was hacking these states, and you think they have some kind of really sophisticated, maybe zero-day exploit. It was actually a very simple SQL injection technique that they used. The way SQL injection works, typically you might have on a website a form where you can, let's say you type your name into a website. The website might go talk to a database and say, hey, give me all the records from, where the person's name is equal to what's put in this box. And it's the way SQL injection works. You basically type into the box, and give it your own instructions. So now it's saying, go get all the information for people whose name is equal to this, and also, delete the database or something, That's just where you type in your instructions. I liken SQL injection to kind of like the hello world of the hacking world. If you learn a programming language, usually the first thing they teach you is how to display hello world on the computer screen. And it's very common, very basic. So if you do the basics, it goes a long way to prevent hackers. I mentioned in 2016, we had no idea that Russia was going to attempt to hack our systems. The federal government, apparently they had intelligence at the time. The fact that they had intelligence was classified, so they didn't tell us to look out or maybe block IP addresses from Russia. Since 2016, the cybersecurity industry, first of all, has grown quite a bit, in large part due to the Russian hacking. There's also a lot better communication between state government and federal government, and also local and county governments. So today, if the federal government had relevant information about a nation state, they would let us know. I have a list of nation state hackers. Russia is by far the most sophisticated and the most active nation state that is involved in hacking, especially with U.S. elections. Russia sees us as their enemy. They want to overthrow the United States, and they want to make us not trust the results of our own elections. China is another nation-state hacker. China tends to, they're more involved with espionage and information gathering. They don't care as much about our elections, but they do care about how we perceive issues that they deem to be important. So there's propaganda about, the politics involving China and Taiwan, for example. And they have actually attempted to hack systems in Taiwan during Taiwanese elections. Iran is kind of in the same boat as Russia. They see us as their enemy. They want to overthrow the United States. They're a little less sophisticated than Russia. They don't have as much funding as Russia, but they do show up in elections in the U.S. And then North Korea is the last one. They're in a similar boat as Iran and Russia, but the funny thing about them is they actually, most of their hacking activities are for money. They tend to, a lot of ransomware comes from North Korea. So you actually don't see them quite as bit in our elections. Okay. So yeah, elections happen offline. The elections in 2016 in Illinois and Arizona, the election results were unaffected by the Russian hacking. And if you think about it, it kind of makes sense. West Virginia, we follow procedures that were put in place when the state was founded back in 1863. And that was before the internet, that was before we had computers. We do use technology around the election. I already mentioned the poll books that we use to verify that people aren't voting more than once. Data sharing with other states to make sure people don't vote in multiple states. But we don't use computer systems connected to the internet during the actual election or for the election anyway. Just as an example, we have an election night reporting system, which is on our website. It shows the results of the election in real time as we get information from the counties. I imagine someone could try to hack that website and change who was listed as winner on that website. But the website does not determine the election results. The election results are determined by communications between our office and the county clerks. They actually give us their numbers. We add them all up. We give them their numbers back. They tell us, yeah, that's what we sent you earlier. There's a wet signature on the official certification for the results. So none of that happens online. Your ballots, they're stored in the bottom of the voting machines. There's a 3% count to make sure that the machines are counting correctly. All of that happens completely off the internet. Our machines don't even have any networking capabilities. I've seen some cases where some states have voting machines that apparently have, maybe like Bluetooth capability, and it's turned off. What happens in those cases is just because of supply chains, there's hardware where they already have, extra features built into the hardware. They just turn them off. In West Virginia, none of our machines even have that. Yeah, I'm pretty sure most people raised their hands earlier. If anybody wants to register to vote, there's the website. There's a QR code. Questions? All right, well, thank you. Okay. Illinois. So, yeah, my best guess, because West Virginia is similar, they probably have a centralized voter registration system that all the counties log into. And so Russia was able to find that system and then hack into it. You know, I've heard about that. I don't know a lot about that, honestly. But, um, yeah, sure, yeah. I'd be happy to. Over the last 10 years, I do think it's much more rare than people think it is. I can tell you with our, checks with other states, typically, we might get a list of like 10 people, like per state, and then we investigate each one, and lots of times it turns into, they're just false positives, every single one. So I think people don't attempt it very often. We do prosecute people. I mean, we have a handful of lawsuits every year where, people who shouldn't register to vote attempt to register to vote, things like that. But the numbers are very small. Yeah, so the way that works, we have, at least here in Kanawha County, it's actually different in every county. But there's like a touch screen, and you vote on the touch screen, and then that prints the ballot that then gets fed into the machine. Yes. Yeah, we've actually dealt with some conspiracy theories about votes going across the internet in our office. It's yeah, if I don't want to say this and sound pretentious or anything, but like if you understand how elections work, none of those conspiracy theories make any sense. I remember there was one where they thought from the 2020 election, they thought that votes for Biden were being sent from West Virginia up to a satellite and then back down to Virginia. Their logic was, I guess Biden won in Virginia in 2020, and they thought that like Biden votes were being sent from West Virginia to Virginia. The reason that doesn't make sense, even, first of all, it's not connected to the internet, but you don't vote like a single candidate. When you go and vote, you vote an entire ballot. You have the president, governor, senator, county commission. A West Virginia ballot doesn't make any sense in Virginia. It's the president might be the same, the governor's different, everything else is different, and so I don't know where these people sometimes get their ideas from, but it that honestly, yeah, they definitely spread that type of misinformation.
I
Yep.
guess based off what you're saying, you could say that voter fraud is common, whether it's effective very often. That's probably the least common part. But how often would you say that dead people vote, for example, or vote by, for example, we see that from time to time in certain counties.
I think he.
Fraud is illegal, but it's not necessarily effective, or you said it's prosecuted. There's those kind of things. You try to register in these states is caught, frequently caught. So it's not frequently as common as people think it is, but it does happen.
Yeah, of course. People try. It's small number of people try. Um, actually, I can't speak for every other state in the country. I know what I've seen in West Virginia. I would probably doubt some of the stories that I've heard from other states, just based on what I've seen and heard here. But I'm sure if you research it, like if you look actually and find like facts on the issue, I'm sure all that's out there.
What about, like, for example, I know you guys work in West Virginia really hard to scrub the voter registration, for people who pass away in their state legislation.
Hmm.
Some of that still kind of slips in. Do you have any kind of number, for years, how many people actually made it through, from the standpoint or something like that?
So.
I know it's significant, it's a really small number.
Yeah, there's a difference between being, say, deceased and on the voter roll and being deceased and actually, voting. Um, We get data from the Social Security Administration. So when someone is dead to the Social Security Administration, during the period where we're legislatively allowed to trim the voter rolls, which is actually like right now, it's every 2 years. So every 2 years we remove deceased people off the list, and they're deceased according to the Social Security Administration. So, there might be a year, and this is in between elections, by the way, there might be a year where, lots of people die every year, right? So there's probably quite a few on the list, but they're not voting. It's not during an election. They just haven't been trimmed out of the list yet.
I think the summary of all this is that you believe, and agree with yourself, and I'm not trying to speak to your passion,
Okay.
that the voting process is remarkably resilient and true to form. In other words, it's count accurate.
Yeah. We've been having elections for multiple hundreds of years. There have been issues, and those issues get fixed. It's no system is ever completely perfect, but it has been refined and made better over time, and especially today, elections. My opinion, I don't think elections have ever been any more secure at any other point in history. The use of technology has dramatically reduced, voter fraud and other forms of election interference.
Would you say like the tactics that these foreign agents utilize have changed over time? Because you mentioned briefly in 2016 it was mostly SQL injection, and kind of the circumstances at the time allowed a very simple elementary, thing you could probably teach just about anybody. So they probably had and I'm speculating, obviously, like these foreign agents probably had, just farms with these people doing this because it'd probably be very easy to train. Do you feel like, can you think of any instances beyond the 2006, because that was a national election, but I'm assuming you've worked in the office there for some years. Have you noticed any other noteworthy instances where their tactics have changed and they've tried to use different ways to interfere?
They have changed over time, but actually the biggest area that they've changed recently because of generative AI, their sort of propaganda arm has changed. I remember seeing where China was using generative AI to try to influence U.S. citizens about Taiwan, and they were actually generating videos and stuff like that, like already using generative AI to generate videos to spread propaganda.
I could almost think of an instance of like some attacker, and I don't know how much this could scale, but they could almost like message their relatives on Facebook and just say like, the ballot changed for some reason. I don't know what happened. I went into the voting booth and the ballot was different. So make sure you do this when you go in on the ballot. And, it's like some sort of false flag to make them make a different decision when they go in there at the last minute or question the authenticity.
I would say don't give them any ideas, but yeah.
Hopefully they're not listening.
No, that would require them to, compromise, I guess, a bunch of people's Facebook accounts. But maybe they can make fake Facebook accounts also. You get those. I got a message from someone trying to impersonate somebody else on my Facebook not too long ago. So. Yep. Any other questions?
Where can we find out more about the work that your agency does?
You can honestly, our office, we're very open. You can call us, you can come into the office, you can send us emails. We have a website. Yeah, there's a website. It's actually on this slide right here, sos.wv.gov. See what we're up to. Yeah, thank you.